Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be comparing the old Integra versus the new Integra. We're right now sitting in a 1998 Acura Integra DC2 generation Type R. 73,000 miles on the odometer, mint condition. The owner, Kevin, has done a few mods to it, and we're going to compare this against my also lightly modified, brand new 2024 DE5 generation Integra Type S. 26 years separated. Do these cars share anything in common in terms of driving feel? So a few specs on this DC2R. It weighs around 2,600 pounds. It has a 1.8 liter naturally aspirated inline 4-cylinder with VTEC, baby. It's the B18C5. It makes 195 horsepower, only 130 pound-feet of torque, 8,500 RPM redline, double wishbone suspension front and rear. Unlike my DE5, which has McPherson strut front, multi-link rear, we have hydraulic power steering, a 5-speed manual transmission. Compared to the standard Integra, this car's been lowered by about 15 millimeters. We're on the stock suspension. The owner, Kevin, mentioned that he recently refreshed all of the bushings with polyurethane spoon bushings. He also threw on the spoon rigid collars. I'll put the full mod list in the video description. And we have these beautiful Mugen MF10 wheels wrapped in Advan A052 rubber, very sticky compound. And compared to a standard Integra, this does have not more downforce, but less lift. You have to remember, back in the 90s, downforce on street cars was not a common trait. And so this has a different front bumper design and a rear wing to reduce overall lift. Let's take this thing for a drive and then hop into my DE5 to see if the Integra name still holds true in 2024. Very mild startup at low RPM, at idle. This just sounds like any other Honda. Love the interior, very simple design, physical buttons for everything. The way that this part is kind of sculpted, it actually makes it a little bit difficult to kind of see what buttons you're reaching for down here below these air vents. Obviously, spend some time with the car, it'll be second nature, but first time hopping into it, I did feel myself taking my eyes off the road, even just to adjust the AC. Let's listen to that VTEC sing. Oh yeah, flat out. That's what I'm talking about. Wow, immediate brake response. At 2,600 pounds, this car is so lightweight, it doesn't need massive brakes. There's the VTEC. Straight line performance, nothing to write home about, but it's the character of this engine, the way it pulls to redline, the way that VTEC crossover lets you feel that dip in torque before it comes on cam. It's intoxicating. Absolutely intoxicating. Love this hydraulic steering rack. So much steering feel and so much front grip. Look at this. Double wishbone front suspension means we have dynamic increase in negative camber the more we load up those front tires. Which means this car basically doesn't understeer at all, at least not at canyon speeds. You just get on the throttle so early coming out of every corner. The suspension, OEM dampers, feel so good, surprisingly good for such an old car. Nice and firm without being harsh. Granted, we are on a pretty smooth road here in Southern California, but this car just works so well. All of the attributes, the hardware, the steering rack, the engine, this glorious 5-speed transmission inspired by the NSX in terms of the shift feel, the brakes, the suspension, everything just works together so harmoniously, and to give me a really strong sense of mechanical connection to the car. would probably fare even better on a tighter, more technical road. But even at high speed, this car feels really confidence-inspiring. Do I wish it had another 50 horsepower? Sure. 195 isn't quite cutting it for this type of road, but it doesn't feel painfully slow either. I used to have a 1999 Civic Si with a B16 A2 engine, little 1.6 liter making 160 horsepower, about the same weight as this, 2,600 pounds, and this feels way quicker than that. That extra 0.2 liters of displacement really does make a big difference. Listen to that induction note. I just topped out of a GT3 RS 4.0, and this engine has just as much character. Less than half the power, actually closer to a third of the horsepower, but the character is still there. High revving, peaky, and that's the charm. That's what makes it so fun. The DE5 Type S, turbocharged, torque. It's a very different experience, but before I spoil it for you guys too much, let's finish driving this Type R. Here we go. This 5-speed manual feels glorious. The throws aren't super short, but they're short enough, and the lever just slots into each gear so smoothly. Honda transmissions truly are some of the best of all time. The cornering limits of this car are shockingly high for an over 25-year-old vehicle. This is the era of Honda that made Honda enthusiast cars legendary. And you can almost argue that the DC2R is even more significant than the S2000 or even the NSX in some ways, because Honda has always been known for front-wheel drive performance. The S2000 and NSX, frankly, are a bit of an anomaly in the history of Hondas. Honda doesn't make any rear-wheel drive cars now, but they sure do still make front-wheel drive cars, like my DE5 Type S. So a big shout out to Kevin for letting me review this DC2 Type R. Now it's time to jump forward 26 years and see if the Integra name still holds true. All right, so we're now back in my 2024 Integra DE5 Type S. This is a car that I drive every single day, as well as to the track, on the track, and back from the track. It truly is an all-purpose vehicle for me. So in terms of mods, I have the Öhlins Road and Track suspension. I have the Whiteline lower ball joints in the front to give me a little bit more negative camber. We're on the Apex VS5RS wheels, 18 by 9.5 plus 45. Kumho V730 tires, 265, endless ME20 brake pads all around, and some Castrol SRF fluid. K20C8 motor, 2-liter inline 4-cylinder turbocharged, 320 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque. Absolute powerhouse of an engine, more than double the peak torque of that little DC2 Type R 1.8 liter. So obviously this car is going to be much, much quicker, especially on this type of road, but is it anywhere near as fun to drive? That's the question. Let's put it into my individual mode, which is essentially just Sport Plus. Everything in the most aggressive setting. Here we go. The difference in torque between these two cars is hilarious. Now this is an engine that actually likes to be wound out. Redline is 7,000 RPM and it pulls pretty hard all the way up to that number, but it feels just as strong in the mid-range. If you keep this engine above around 3,500 RPM, it's happy. It'll give you that immediate throttle response that you're looking for, at least as immediate as you can expect from a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. The throttle response really is quite good though. Is it B18C5 good? Not quite. Nor does it make nearly as intoxicating of a sound but the way this car pulls is on a completely different plane of existence. And the way this car handles, while not as lively as the DC2R with stock suspension, this car with Öhlins loves to turn. The front end is super sharp. It doesn't have the feedback of that old-fashioned hydraulic steering rack, but even with this EPS rack, there's a reasonable amount of feedback and very immediate front-end response. This whole car just feels a lot more hunkered down, less playful, and more serious in every way. The stock Brembo brakes with just a pad and fluid upgrade, flawless. No fade on track. They work great on the street as well. This car just has so much grip. We're on a slightly less aggressive tire, a Kumho V730, compared to the A052s on that DC2R, but I would argue that my car feels like it can corner even harder. The suspension does a better job at keeping the body controlled and flat in the corners. Now obviously the Öhlins are a big contributing factor, but even with stock suspension, this car felt super hunkered down. You throw the adaptive dampers into Sport or Sport Plus, and the car gives you all the confidence in the world to attack corners hard. The DC2R, while it had very high limits, times really have changed in the last 25 plus years. A car that weighs 600 pounds more and has lost its front double wishbone suspension feels like it corners just as hard and with even more precision. Now, all of that aside, I'm not giggling nearly as much right now, am I? And that's because the charm of that DC2R is not a result of its quantitative performance. It's a result of how it goes about doing its business. That high revving VTEC engine, that super lightweight tossable chassis, that hydraulic steering that communicates so much about the road through your fingertips. Those are the things that make that DC2R so fun to drive, and frankly, way more entertaining to drive than this DE5 Type S. But does that mean the new Type S should no longer be called an Integra? Absolutely not. What made the DC2 Type R so legendary outside of those few qualities that I mentioned that are in stark contrast to my brand new Type S, those other qualities are still very much here in the new car. The fact that you can actually drive both of these cars every single day. Obviously, refinement has come a long way in the last 25 years, but back in the late 90s, the DC2R, when just putting around town, was a pretty mellow car to drive. It was just like any other Honda. Light and easy to use shifter and clutch. You had space in the rear hatch for all your groceries, but when you take it onto the racetrack or a nice back road, both cars come alive, and in their respective eras are still, in my opinion, the absolute best front-wheel drive performance cars. So let me know what you think about this comparison, the DC2 Type R versus the DE5 Type S. Does the Integra name still hold true 25 years after the original DC2R came out? A big shout out to Kevin for letting me review his original Integra Type R. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.